first podcast. I am so excited to finally be doing this. I have had this as a dream for a very, very long time. I've wanted to do a podcast. I've wanted to develop this idea, but I'm a single mom of 4. And so as you can imagine, I don't have a lot of time, a lot of free time, a lot of spare time. So I thought, I'll do that one day down the road. And I kept kicking the can down the road, And then this past July, I was diagnosed with cancer and I went through treatments, did the whole chemotherapy thing. I don't have my hair anymore. It's growing back though. It's finally coming back in. But, and I realized, we're not always promised tomorrow. So maybe it's time for me to stop kicking the can down the road on some of the things that God had birthed in my heart and maybe just jump in with both feet and do it. It may not be perfect, but we're going to give it a shot and see what happens. So this is the first episode of what I'm calling A Table in the Desert. That's the name of this podcast. And we'll talk about the title and how I got that title and how I came up with that idea. But basically, here's the thing. In the Bible, from Genesis to Revelation, there is this thread, this theme that runs straight through the Bible. And it's the theme of rescue, how God rescues his children, how he shows up and proves himself faithful. He shows up in impossible situations and makes the impossible a possibility. He does it time and time again. From Genesis to Revelation, you have story after story after story after story. There are so many stories. I'm not even sure there's enough days in the year for us to do a podcast like this because there's so many stories. But there's not just stories in the Bible. There are stories today of God's faithfulness to his children, God's rescue of his children, how God shows up for his children time and time again in impossible situations. He shows up and sits with us in the dust and the dirt of life and helps us. And those stories are not just about us. God never wastes a story. So when he shows up in your life, he is not just doing that for you. He is doing it for the kingdom because he wants those stories to then become kingdom stories that you tell and retell of the faithfulness of God. We don't just go through things and have him show up and then we're like, oh, well, that was bad. Okay, well, I'm just going to move on with my life. No. That's not how God works. He is a kingdom-minded God, and he wants us to share those stories so that they become kingdom stories, so that they help other people. It's never just about you. It's about God, and he wants you to share those stories of his faithfulness. So we are going to look at Psalm 78 today because that is where I got the idea for the name of this podcast. You're going to see me take my glasses on and off and on and off because I have terrible eyesight and I need to get some new glasses. But that is a story for another day. We're going to read Psalm 78, 1 through 8, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. This is why these stories must be told. It's why we need to visit and revisit these stories over and over. Oh, my people, listen to my instructions. Open your ears to what I am saying, for I will speak to you in a parable. I will teach you hidden lessons from our past, stories we have heard and known, stories our ancestors handed down to us. We will not hide these truths from our children. We will tell the next generation about the glorious deeds of the Lord, about his power and his mighty wonders. For he issued his laws to Jacob. He gave his instructions to Israel. He commanded our ancestors to teach them to their children. Did you hear that? He didn't just suggest it. He commanded it. He commanded our ancestors to teach them to their children, so the next generation might know them, even the children not yet born, and they will in turn teach their own children. So each generation should set its hope anew on God, not forgetting his glorious miracles and obeying his commands. See, there's a tie there between remembering, forgetting, and that's the difference between obedience versus disobedience. When we remember, we obey. When we forget, we disobey. Then they will not be like their ancestors, stubborn, rebellious, and unfaithful, refusing to give their hearts to God. Now, do you hear that? This idea I have, this is not just pie in the sky idea that would make a cute podcast. This is commanded. God commands us to tell and retell the stories of God so that the next generation will hear and they will be able to grab on to that hope when they're struggling. And it's the difference between obedience and disobedience. Remembering and retelling leads to obedience. Forgetting and not telling, that leads to disobedience. So it's imperative, it's important that we tell and retell the stories of God. And now we're going to go back to Psalm 78. I'm going to show you where I got the idea and where I got the title of this podcast. Again, the title is Table in the Desert. So listen and see if you can find out where I find it. We're in Psalm 78, 17 through 29. So 17 through 29. Yet they kept on sinning against him. Now he's talking about the children of Israel, and they're in the desert. This is after the Red Sea, after they're delivered out of Egypt. Yet they kept on sinning against him, rebelling against the Most High in the desert. They stubbornly tested God in their hearts, demanding the foods they craved. They even spoke against God himself, saying, God can't give us food in the wilderness. Yes, he can strike a rock so water gushes out, but he can't give his people bread and meat. When the Lord heard them, he was furious. Now, why was he furious? He had just parted a sea for these people. He had parted a sea and drowned the entirety of Pharaoh's army right before their eyes. And they're saying God can't do these things. So he was mad. He was upset with them. Let's see where I'm. When the Lord heard this, he was furious. The fire of his wrath burned against Jacob. Yes, his anger rose against Israel. For they did not believe God or trust him to care for them. But he commanded the skies to open. He opened the doors of heaven and he rained down manna for them to eat. He gave them bread from angels. They ate the food of angels. God gave them all they could hold. He released the east wind in the heavens, and he guided the south wind by his mighty power, and he rained down meat as thick as dust. Birds as plentiful as the sand on the seashore. He caused the birds to fall within their camp and all around their tents, and the people ate their fill. He gave them what they craved. So, I guess you can see there where I got. Now, what you understand is it says here that God they challenge God saying, God can't lay a table in the wilderness. I interchange the word desert for wilderness because throughout Scripture, those two words are interchanged a lot because the Judean wilderness and the Judean desert, it's kind of the same thing. You know, even when there's patches of green in Israel, it's usually followed by patches of desert. And then you go back to another patch of green and another patch of desert. Wilderness, we in the West, especially here in America, we think about wilderness like the lush wildernesses we have here in America. And that's not what it's talking about. It's really talking about the Judean desert and the Judean wilderness, which is very dry. It's kind of a barren wasteland at times. And so that's what it's talking about. So the children of Israel said, God, you can't lay a table for us in the desert. You can't do it. You give us water, but that's not food to eat. That's not bread. That's not meat. You can't lay a table for us in the desert. And God says, oh, hold my sweet tea and watch me work. And God did. He gave them the bread of angels. I love that. What must the bread of angels have tasted like? I hope that we get a little taste in heaven one day of the bread of angels, because I want to know what it tastes like. But he did. He fed them with the bread of angels. God absolutely showed up for his people. Even in this desert wasteland, he showed up for his children. And this is just one of the many stories, and we will revisit that story again as we're going through the Bible. But I want to start in Genesis, and I want to pull at this thread of how the Lord rescues his children when they are struggling. He absolutely can and will rescue us when we need it. But like I said, he doesn't just do it about us. He doesn't just show up for us. It's not just about us. It's about the kingdom. We're going to look forward at Psalm 78. We're going to move forward to verse 40 through 42. Okay? Oh, how often they rebelled against him in the wilderness, in the desert, and grieved his heart in that dry wasteland. See, there's proof. I'm not just pulling your leg. Wilderness and desert are interchanged in the Bible quite often. They grieved his heart in that dry wasteland. Again and again, they tested God's patience and provoked the Holy One of Israel. They did not remember his power and how he rescued them from their enemies. They did not remember the miraculous signs in Egypt. So they did not remember. Why? They weren't telling the stories enough. They were living in the desert. They were living through this hard time. And instead of remembering what God had done, they grumbled and complained, and they did not use their mouths to tell what God had already done for them. They didn't get up every morning and go collect that manna and go, "Can you believe this? This is amazing. We're eating the bread of angels." And they didn't go run to their neighbor and say, "Did you get the bread this morning? It's so amazing. Isn't God awesome?" They weren't telling and retelling the stories so they would forget, and then they would disobey. And it was a vicious cycle, a vicious cycle. And so later here in this desert space, God will set up times for the children of Israel to remember and retell the stories so they can remember what God has done in the past. What he's trying to do is set up a cycle where they have to remember, they have to tell, and so that they will remember these things forward, not just for them in the future, but for their children in the future. It's a command. God wants us to remember his faithfulness so we can remember that forward, because if we're not remembering it forward, we're forgetting. So that's what I want to do. I want to start next week. We're going to start all the way back at Genesis, and we're just going to go straight through the Bible, one story after another, and we're going to tell the stories of God. We're going to talk about them, but I don't want to just tell the stories of the Bible. Those are important. They are must-tell stories. But we've got some must-tell stories that we need to tell here, today, now, because God is still showing up for his children. He has not stopped that. He is still doing that. He is actively giving us kingdom stories when he shows up for us in the midst of difficult times. When he shows up for us, he is giving us stories that we must then tell and retell and keep telling. Not just tell once, but tell till people are like, okay, we get it. God showed up for you. And we should wear people out with our stories of God. So during this podcast, I'm going to tell the stories in the Bible. I'm also going to tell some of my stories, because as a single mom, let me tell you, I have had story after story after story of God's faithfulness. He has showed up for us more times than we deserve. I have incredible stories. I'm even writing a book right now called Hope in the Midst of the Nightmare, where I'm talking about about all the stories that God has given us, all the God stories. But I also want to tell your stories. See, I spend way too much time listening to people retell the stories on Reddit, these Reddit stories that people share because they're crazy. Some of them are just crazy. But instead of spending our time listening to Reddit stories, maybe it's time we start listening to the stories of God. Maybe that's what we need to be focusing on, the stories of God. So I want you to reach out to me. You can comment on the video. You can contact me on social media. I'll try to connect all those things. Tell me your stories of God's faithfulness. I want to share your stories of God because remember, those stories are not just about you. They're about all of us. They're about the kingdom. They're kingdom stories and they need to be shared. So let's make that a normal thing to where people can just listen to this podcast or even other podcasts and listen to God's stories so that when we are struggling, when other people are struggling, they'll be able to go back to our stories. Boy, that was our stories of God's faithfulness, and use those stories for His glory. So, and I guess I just want to end by kind of talking about one of mine amazing stories. I was, like I said, I was diagnosed with cancer in July, and God has been so incredibly faithful to us in the midst of this because after I was diagnosed, I was in a lot of pain and I couldn't work. And so my work amazingly put me on a short-term disability. So I was able to maintain all my benefits and have my health insurance and all the things. And but I was put on only a portion of my salary. And you got to understand, as a single mom of four, I was already struggling financially before the cancer diagnosis. And then they put me on short-term disability, and I'm only making a partial portion of my salary. I thought, oh my goodness, I was more afraid of not being able to feed my children than I was of the cancer that was inside my body. Now make that make sense. But that was the real fear. That's what kept me up at night, not the cancer. It was the finances. I was terrified that I would lose my house, that we would lose everything. But I don't know. It's God's infinite way that He makes God math work, because God math, it be out here being more weird than the new math that the kids are having to learn at school now. It's unbelievable to watch this new math, this God math that He does, because every time I went to my bank account, I had money. It was there. It was almost like Elijah and the widow. You remember that story of Elijah and the widow, where the widow kept going to her oil and her flour, and there was always oil and flour there that just kept renewing and kept renewing. And that's how I felt. Every time I opened up my bank account to have to pay for something, there's money there. In fact, we had more money in our account during the time that I was on short-term disability than I did prior to going on short-term disability. Make that make sense. Figure that one out, because it amazed me every single time I'd open up my bank account, there'd be money there. I'd close the bank account, and then another bill would come due, and I would freak out because I don't think I have money in the bank account, and I would open it up and there'd be money there. I even had money in savings. I'm back at work now, back on my full salary. I have less money in my account now than I did when I was only living on a portion of my salary. And that is an absolute miraculous thing that God did. He had people that would show up, that would send us checks in the mail. We had our church that would send us cash. I mean, we were never without. And the other thing is, the hospital that I was getting my treatments through, they gave me some financial assistance, so I didn't have hospital bills piling up. Y'all, the Lord has been so faithful in the midst of this that sometimes I just can't even get over it. How faithful He has been, even though I've seen Him work in the past. We forget. We forget how faithful he's been in the past, and we start to panic and we think, oh, will he be faithful again this time? Well, you know what? He will be, because that's just who he is. He shows up every single time for his children. He never shows up like we want him to, but he shows up every single time for his children. So that is my first story of my first God story of how the Lord has been good to me. I hope that encourages you here today. I hope that maybe this week, this story will meet you in the middle of where you are, and you will trust that God will come and meet you in the midst of your trial and your tribulation. He is the God who is always willing to come sit with us in the dust and the dirt of this life. He never leaves us. He never forsakes us, but he doesn't just do it for you. He does it for the kingdom. And so I want to challenge you this week. Tell your stories. Tell your stories to people. Reach out to me with your stories. I want to share them. Because remember, if we aren't remembering forward, then we're forgetting. And we don't ever, ever want to forget how faithful God is. He is ever faithful. And I hope that you will experience that this week as you travel through this world, that you will experience the God of rescue. He absolutely can set a table in the desert. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. I have enjoyed spending this time with you guys, and I look forward to next time when we will be in Genesis. See you then.